I was a senior in high school when my cousin Liz made the accusation that destroyed my life forever. We'd grown up almost like siblings, spending weekends at each other's houses and trading jokes, secrets, and teenage frustrations. Our family seemed close-knit, organizing big holiday gatherings and potluck dinners with unspoken but unbreakable bonds. I never thought that intimacy could turn on me. At 17, I held a precious college acceptance letter and a tuition fund from my grandparents' trust. My parents used to call me the family's chance to break the old curse of never graduating from a prestigious university. Liz's accusation shifted everything in a heartbeat. She told them I'd assaulted her one night after a party. She cried, insisting she'd stayed silent out of fear. Nobody questioned her story. I remember the way my father's face darkened, rage flooding his eyes. I recall him saying, "You are no son of mine." He canceled my college fund, kicked me out, and told me to never return. My mother sobbed but refused to look at me. My grandparents didn't even call. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. One moment, I was the family's pride. The next, a living disgrace tossed aside without a shred of mercy or doubt. I ended up crashing on a friend's couch, clutching a single duffel bag containing my clothes and an old laptop. Everything felt unreal. Liz's story spread through my extended family like wildfire, painting me as a monster who preyed on his own cousin. Nobody bothered to ask for evidence or a detailed timeline. The shame was suffocating, and I could hardly show my face in public. I tried calling my parents to speak calmly, to explain that nothing happened, but their anger drowned out my words. My father claimed I'd broken his trust beyond repair. He screamed that I'd never be welcomed under his roof again. With my college funds revoked, I had no path forward. Scholarships were limited, and applications had closed long ago. I took a job at a hardware store, saving what little I could. Meanwhile, Liz went on with her life, basking in sympathy and attention. She never once showed a hint of remorse. I felt trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. Watching her laugh at family events on social media made my blood boil. I was too numb and devastated to fight back. I shut down emotionally, focusing on surviving day by day. Nobody wanted to hear my side. I was guilty in their eyes, a lost cause with no one left to believe me. Months crawled by. I didn't have enough money to enroll anywhere, so I took whatever odd jobs I could find. My once close relatives turned their backs, refusing to return my calls or texts. My aunt and uncle even went as far as blocking me on every possible platform. That was Liz's doing. She had them convinced I was dangerous. My friends' parents looked at me with pity but never asked me to leave. I could see the unease though, and it stung like hell. Every time I saw news about classmates heading to college, my chest tightened. I had dreams of standing on campus lawns, free and excited about my future. Instead, I was stocking shelves, cleaning bathrooms, and barely scraping together enough for gas. The injustice ate at me daily, but I felt powerless. Liz enjoyed her victory, though I had no idea why she did it. I had never hurt her, never laid a hand on her in any inappropriate way, but nobody cared. The tension in my mind spiraled into resentment, a burning fury that filled my thoughts. Still, I kept my head down. I had no choice but to adapt. My reality was bleak, and anger alone wouldn't fix it. Survival became my sole priority, forcing me to bury my hatred beneath layers of pain. Everything changed a few years later when I got a surprising call from my grandmother. She sounded hesitant, as though unsure if I would even pick up. She said Liz was gravely ill, diagnosed with an aggressive cancer. Doctors gave her a limited time to live, and the family had rallied around her for support. By then, I had moved into a tiny studio apartment, working 2 jobs to pay bills and occasionally taking online classes in hopes of salvaging my education. The moment my grandmother mentioned Liz, my body tensed. The resentment I had buried resurfaced in a hot flash of rage. She told me Liz wanted to speak to me. I nearly hung up out of reflex, but found myself transfixed. Why would Liz want to see the cousin she had accused of something so vile? My grandmother pleaded, saying Liz was full of regret, that she was desperate to make things right before it was too late. I felt no obligation to oblige, but a morbid curiosity took hold. Part of me wanted to see her suffer, to confront the person who had stolen my future. I agreed to come, but only on my terms. My grandmother sounded relieved, though a lingering tension hinted that not everyone supported my visit. I decided I didn't care either way. The day I walked into Liz's hospital room, I was struck by how frail she looked. She was hooked up to machines and IV lines that snaked across her bed. She gave me a weak smile, her eyes rimmed with dark circles and her voice barely above a whisper. My parents stood awkwardly in the corner, eyes flickering with discomfort when they noticed me. My aunt and uncle were there too, their expressions inscrutable. Nobody rushed forward to hug me. They simply stepped aside, letting me approach Liz's bedside. She started by saying she was sorry, her voice trembling. She admitted she had lied, that I'd never laid a hand on her. She confessed it had all been a desperate ploy for attention, fueled by jealousy and resentment. She said she had felt overshadowed, that everyone was always praising me and ignoring her accomplishments. She wanted sympathy, to see if people would rally around her if she painted me as a villain. I felt no relief. Her tears meant nothing to me. The damage was irreparable. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back, icy fury washing over me. Everyone stared, but I refused to comfort her. She had condemned me to a living hell, and she knew exactly what she was doing all along. My mother begged me to forgive Liz, saying she was about to die and that carrying such hatred was a burden on my soul. My father stood silent, arms crossed, face tinged with regret, but not enough to offer a real apology. My aunt and uncle looked expectant, as if I should instantly absolve her. Liz managed to whisper that she wanted me to keep her secret, to tell no one of her confession. She pleaded that going public about her lie would tear the family apart and overshadow her final days. I stared at the people who had once been my entire world, now asking me to maintain the very lie that ruined my life. My father cleared his throat, muttering something about not dragging the family name through the mud. My aunt nodded, cautioning me that the truth would harm Liz's dignity in her remaining time. They seemed so certain I would comply. I felt a numbness fill me, a calm so profound it scared me. I said nothing, turned my back, and walked out of the room. As I left, I caught the panic on my mother's face. They must have sensed I wouldn't just bury the truth, not after all they had done, not after what they cost me. Forgiveness was never an option. I spent several nights grappling with rage, envisioning ways to expose Liz's confession. Part of me wanted to shout it from the hospital rooftops. I wanted the entire world to know that I was innocent, that she had maliciously fabricated her allegations. But I knew an impulsive outburst wouldn't achieve the outcome I craved. My family, especially my parents, had betrayed me. They had cut me off, discarded me like garbage, and watched me struggle without remorse. Now they expected me to lie again, to preserve their appearances for the sake of a dying woman who had never cared about my well-being. I decided I wanted more than just an apology. I wanted them to face the consequences of their actions, to feel the weight of my suffering. I looked into legal options but realized time was short and Liz's condition was deteriorating. A drawn-out lawsuit would only drain resources I didn't have. I needed something swift and final. I started collecting proof. I recorded my phone calls with my grandmother who had urged me to visit Liz. I documented every conversation, every text, building an ironclad file. If they wanted me silent, they would have to earn it. My rage simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back with brutal clarity. My biggest break came when Liz herself agreed to a private conversation with me, hoping to ease her guilt. I suggested we talk alone, no parents present. I pretended I was softening, that I might forgive her if I heard more details. She welcomed the idea, seeing it as a chance to unburden her conscience. I made sure I had a small recording device hidden in my jacket. When I walked into her hospital room, my heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. She apologized again, elaborating on how she'd orchestrated the lie. She described talking to a couple of her friends, convincing them I had cornered her after a party. She detailed how she sobbed in front of my parents, emphasizing how scared she was. She admitted she saw their wrath towards me and felt a perverse thrill at how easily they believed her. Every word etched into my memory, and the recorder captured it all. She begged me not to hate her. I stared at her hollow cheeks, listened to her ragged breathing, and felt nothing. No empathy, no sadness, just cold resolution that I would use this confession. I slipped out of the room, the weight of her betrayal heavier but strangely empowering. I had her admission, and nobody could deny it now. After I secured that recording, my mind moved to how I could maximize the fallout. Simply posting it online or blasting it on social media felt too chaotic, and I wanted a precise, targeted impact. My parents were pillars in their church community, always boasting about their devout faith. Liz's parents were similarly revered. Everyone viewed them as pious figures upholding moral values. So I made a plan to send the recordings to selected individuals, their church leaders, close family friends, even a couple of longtime neighbors who had snubbed me after Liz's accusations. I wanted them to hear the full truth, unedited. I waited until a day before Liz's scheduled discharge from the hospital. She was going to spend her final weeks at home, surrounded by family and showered with sympathy. That morning, I composed a brief email, attached the audio files, and explained how my life had been destroyed by this lie. I didn't embellish anything. I let Liz's words speak for themselves. Then I hit send. I turned off my phone and went to work, half expecting a storm of calls and messages. Part of me wondered if I'd feel guilty. Instead, I felt a strange calm. The years of anger had found an outlet, and I was ready for the consequences, whatever they might be. By the time I checked my phone during lunch break, it was overflowing with voicemails and texts. The top message was from my father, demanding I call him immediately. There were multiple missed calls from my mother, a furious text from my aunt, and even a couple of messages from extended family members who hadn't spoken to me in years. I scrolled through them, feeling an odd mix of satisfaction and anticipation. My father's tone in his voicemail was frantic, furious, and almost pleading. He said, "How could you do this to us? We're in a crisis." I played it again, letting each word soak in. This was the same man who banished me without a second thought. Now he was in panic mode because his pristine reputation and that of his precious daughter were at stake. My aunt's text threatened legal action if I didn't retract my statements, claiming Liz was too ill to cope with such stress. She conveniently forgot that her daughter's lie had cost me my entire future. I smirked at the hypocrisy. For years, they let me suffer. Now that the truth was out, they wanted to dictate the narrative. I refused to pick up any calls. I wanted them to stew in their own regret, to taste the bitterness they'd forced on me for years. That evening, I finally answered a call from my mother. She sounded like she'd been crying. She tried to guilt-trip me, saying Liz's condition was worsening and that the stress of being exposed could expedite her decline. She asked if I really wanted my cousin's last memories to be tainted by public shame. I took a long pause, remembering the lonely nights I spent working dead-end jobs, the endless self-doubt, and the future she ripped away. I asked my mother, "Where were you when I was desperate for any sign of support?" She started stammering about being confused, about how Liz's tears had felt so genuine. I cut her off. I told her I didn't owe them silence or forgiveness. She sobbed, begging me to at least issue a statement that the recordings were old or taken out of context. I refused. In that moment, I felt my final tie to my family snap. All I could recall was their betrayal and the emptiness they left me to endure. They had cast me aside without hesitation. Now they were reaping the consequences. My mother ended the call in tears. I felt a pang, but it faded quickly. This wasn't my mess. This was the truth finally being heard. I owed them nothing more than I'd already given. Within days, the fallout was massive. Church elders confronted my parents about how they'd handled the situation, expressing horror that they'd disowned me without even investigating properly. My father lost a significant leadership role he'd held there, and several of their close friends distanced themselves in disgust. My aunt and uncle faced similar backlash. Their congregation found out Liz had lied, and sympathy for her illness morphed into confusion and anger. People still pitied her cancer battle, but couldn't reconcile that pity with the harm she'd caused an innocent family member. My phone buzzed incessantly with apologies from cousins who had believed Liz. Some apologized sincerely, others just seemed worried about their own reputations. I responded sparingly, refusing to play the gracious victim. Meanwhile, Liz remained in the hospital longer than anticipated. Rumors circulated that her doctors wanted to monitor her stress levels. She wasn't doing well. My grandmother called, begging me to consider visiting Liz again, to show some mercy. I declined. She claimed Liz needed closure. My only reply was that I had closure the moment I sent those recordings. Nobody had shown me mercy when I was left homeless and hopeless. Now they wanted compassion for the dying liar. I had none left to give. That wound was irreversibly sealed. Despite my refusal to see Liz again, I did get updates from various relatives. Apparently, her condition was deteriorating faster than expected. My mother left voicemails saying that Liz regretted everything, that she prayed for my forgiveness, and hoped to make amends before the end. I listened to each message, feeling nothing but hollow indignation. I didn't doubt her fear, but remorse was worthless after years of allowing me to suffer. If she truly wanted to help, she'd have spoken up sooner. She would have saved my college fund, my reputation, and my relationships with everyone who mattered. Instead, she waited until her own mortality loomed. I found it difficult to sympathize with someone who only repented when facing death. Relatives started spinning narratives, suggesting I should find a way to make peace for my own sake. They warned I might regret not reconciling once she was gone. I saw it as another manipulation tactic. They wanted me to remain the bigger person, to mend familial ties and preserve some semblance of unity. But that unity had been shattered beyond repair. I stayed firm in my decision, blocking most calls. My revenge was already executed. I had exposed the truth. Their guilt was their own burden to carry. I was finally free of it. Liz passed away about 2 weeks after my recordings became public knowledge. She died in her sleep, surrounded by the family who had believed her lies for years. According to a cousin who texted me, Liz's final hours were spent in pain, muttering apologies, but never naming me outright. The funeral was a tense affair. I didn't go, I wasn't invited, and even if I had been, I had no desire to stand among people who had thrown me away. My parents apparently stood near Liz's casket, receiving subdued condolences from a community now aware of their betrayal. My aunt and uncle were rumored to be inconsolable, faced with the heartbreak of losing a child and the shame of her false accusations. Friends told me the mood was confusing, sadness for Liz's death, but an undercurrent of unease about the circumstances. Some reached out to me after the service, claiming they wanted to make amends. I doubted their sincerity. Even if they were genuine, it wouldn't erase the years of hell I endured. By then, I had focused on my own life. I had a stable apartment, a steady job, and was slowly rebuilding my education plans. I saw no place for them in my future. Their apology came too late, and it fell on ears that no longer cared. Months have passed since then, and I found a semblance of peace in my life. I keep in touch with 1 or 2 relatives who believed me from the start, or at least had the decency to admit their mistake early on. As for my parents, we haven't spoken beyond a few strained texts. They still urge me to meet, to let them explain their side, but I can't find it in my heart to give them that chance. Some might call me cold, but I call it self-preservation. They let Liz's lie destroy me, turned a blind eye to my suffering, and only reached out when it affected them socially or spiritually. I won't pretend everything's fine now. My revenge was exposing the truth they fought to suppress. I don't regret it. In fact, I feel lighter. I'm finally free of the crushing guilt they forced onto my shoulders. Liz is gone, and her admission stands as proof that I was never the villain. They'll have to live with the fallout, the shattered reputation, and the knowledge that they lost the son they once claimed to love. I don't lose sleep over it. I'm moving forward without them, determined to build a life on my own terms. They may beg for forgiveness, but it's a door I'll never open. I never thought my life would come to this, posting my mess on Reddit for strangers to read, but I need to let it out somewhere because my friends, real friends, are tired of hearing about it. It all started years ago when I was 17 and my sister Kayla decided that she couldn't stand my existence anymore. We were never close, but I never imagined she'd do something so cruel. She spread a rumor to my parents that I was secretly selling drugs at school. No one questioned her story. Without a second thought, I was kicked out of the house. At first, I thought there must be a misunderstanding. I told my parents I had no idea what Kayla was talking about. I'd never even touched marijuana, let alone harder stuff. But they looked at me like I was some junkie. My dad yelled about how he wouldn't have a criminal under his roof. My mom cried and asked how I could betray their trust. Meanwhile, Kayla watched silently from the corner, her arms crossed, a smug look on her face. When I tried to protest, my father shoved a duffel bag into my arms and told me to disappear. I left with what little dignity I had. A friend from school let me crash on his couch, and his parents took pity on me. They were good people who believed me. They even helped me get a part-time job so I could save for my own place. I sometimes snuck back to my old neighborhood at night, just to see if I could figure out why Kayla had done this. Of course, she never gave me a chance. I was persona non grata at my own home. So I kept my head down, worked hard, and focused on surviving. Months passed, then a year. I managed to graduate high school with decent grades, which felt like a miracle given the stress. The day I walked across that stage, I looked into the crowd. I didn't spot my parents or Kayla. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it still hurt. That night, my friend's dad handed me a card with a small amount of money inside. He said he was proud. I nearly broke down in gratitude. That support was a reminder that not everyone believed I was worthless. Determined, I decided to keep going and prove them all wrong. Without any financial help from my family, I found a job as a server. I worked double shifts when possible and eventually moved into a cheap apartment. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. I kept in touch with my friends' parents who checked in on me occasionally. I tried calling my own parents a couple of times, hoping to clear the air. Each time, my dad hung up and my mom muttered something about trusting Kayla's word over mine. That rejection stung, but I refused to let it break me. I was entirely determined to build a life independently. College wasn't an option right away. I needed more savings, so I enrolled in community college part-time. Over the next 2 years, I juggled classes and work. My grades weren't spectacular, but I passed. I managed to transfer to a state university with a scholarship that covered part of my tuition. By the time I was 20, I had enough financial aid and loans to go full-time. I dove into my studies, focusing on business. I had a vague dream of opening my own place one day. The idea of success, of proving everyone wrong, was what so badly kept me motivated. During this time, Kayla was apparently thriving. She attended a private college and bragged on social media about her fancy internship. My parents beamed in her photos, looking like the proudest family in the world. I felt a sting of resentment, but I reminded myself that one day I'd have something to brag about too. I was forging my own path. Eventually, I rented a small off-campus apartment. I found a decent roommate, studied hard, and managed to maintain a B average. I even started a small side hustle tutoring classmates, which helped me cover some of my living expenses. I was 22 when I finally heard from my parents again. My phone rang late at night. Seeing my dad's name made my stomach drop. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. He sounded tired, older than I remembered. He said my mom was sick. They'd just found out she had a serious heart condition. My first reaction was concern, of course, but then I remembered how they'd thrown me out. My dad asked if I could come visit. He mentioned that Kayla insisted I'd moved far away. I told him I'd seriously think about it. I hung up and spent the night tossing and turning. My parents hadn't been there when I needed them most. They believed Kayla's lies without hesitation. Now, because my mom was sick, they wanted me back in their lives. Part of me felt guilty. If my mom was truly in danger, should I hold a grudge? But another part remembered how badly they'd hurt me. I thought about it for days. Finally, I decided to go home, but only to see my mom in the hospital. I wasn't about to move back in or pretend everything was fine at all. When I arrived, Kayla was sitting in the waiting area. She looked surprised, maybe even annoyed that I'd come. She tried to make small talk, acting as if nothing had happened. I ignored her and went straight to my mom's room. Seeing her so frail made my anger waver, but then she opened her eyes, saw me, and started crying. She apologized for everything, saying she was misled by Kayla's convincing story. She claimed she regretted letting me go. I listened, but I didn't offer comfort or forgiveness. I told her I was there to see if she was okay. My dad arrived soon after. He seemed relieved to see me, but there was no warm hug. He tried to explain that Kayla said she caught me dealing, that she'd found hidden bags of pills in my drawer. I asked if they ever bothered to check. They looked guilty. My mom mumbled that they trusted Kayla because she'd always been a straight-A student. My dad admitted he'd been suspicious of me for a while, though he had no proof. I stood there, hands in my pockets, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Mostly, I felt so painfully betrayed all over again. I visited my mom regularly for the next week, but I avoided Kayla. She tried to corner me in the hallway once, saying she felt bad about what happened. I glared at her and kept walking. Her apology meant nothing to me. She'd destroyed my life with that lie, and she never admitted it until now. My dad asked me to come home for a family dinner when my mom was discharged, claiming she needed the support. I hesitated, but part of me wanted closure. So I agreed to step into that house again, though I deeply dreaded the confrontation. The place looked the same, except my room was now Kayla's study space. My posters were gone, replaced by her academic awards. I felt a pang of anger. My dad served dinner, and my mom tried making small talk. Kayla fidgeted, unable to meet my eyes. Finally, I asked point blank, why had she lied? She mumbled something about me always getting attention for being the nice one. She claimed I overshadowed her socially, even if her grades were better. She was jealous. That was all it took to ruin my life. I felt a surge of rage I couldn't suppress. I slammed my fork down, demanding to know if that was her entire justification. She flinched and nodded. My parents sat there looking miserable, but I had no sympathy. They let her do this to me. I stood up and told them that I didn't come here to reconcile, but to deliver a message. I was done being the scapegoat. They begged me to calm down. My mom started crying about her heart condition, saying the stress might kill her. I felt a flicker of guilt, but the anger was stronger. I left the table right then and walked out. I stayed away for several weeks after that. My phone blew up with messages from my dad, asking if I'd come visit my mom, reminding me she was fragile. Kayla even tried emailing me, but I never responded. I had too much bitterness bottled up. Meanwhile, I was nearing graduation. The plan was to move to a different city and start a new job. Through a career fair, I landed a position at a promising startup. It felt like a big step toward leaving my past behind. Part of me wanted to cut off my family and never look back. But as the weeks went by, I heard from extended relatives. My aunt called, saying my mom's condition was worsening. She pleaded with me to at least make peace before moving. I felt torn. Despite everything, she was still my mother, and she was dying. Could I live with myself if I just walked away? After agonizing over it, I decided to visit once more, on my own terms. I wouldn't be manipulated, though. I went to the house, found my mom alone in the living room, and told her we needed to talk without anyone else interrupting ever again. She was pale, breathing heavily, and I could see the toll this illness was taking on her. But I didn't budge. I told her how alone I'd felt, how they'd never given me a chance to defend myself. I demanded to know if she truly believed I was some sort of criminal. She shook her head, tears in her eyes, saying she'd been overwhelmed by Kayla's evidence. I asked her why she never reached out in the years since, and she just sobbed that she was too ashamed. It was pathetic. I felt no sympathy, only an absolute cold resolve. I spelled out what I wanted, an acknowledgement from them that Kayla lied, and a written apology they would share with the relatives who believed I was a junkie. My mom nodded weakly, saying she would do whatever it took. I told her to rest, that I would wait for it in writing. Then I left. I didn't see my dad or Kayla on the way out, which was fine by me. I drove away feeling a mix of triumph and bitterness. I knew I might never truly forgive them, but at least they'd have to set the record straight. A week later, I received a typed letter signed by both of my parents. It stated that Kayla had fabricated the entire story about me selling drugs. They apologized and asked all extended family to forgive them for their mistake. They mailed copies to my aunts, uncles, and grandparents. I felt a grim satisfaction reading those words. It wouldn't erase what happened, but it was a start. I didn't speak to Kayla again. She sent me a text saying she was sorry, that she regretted her actions, and she wanted to rebuild our relationship. I immediately deleted it without replying. As for my mom, I learned that her condition was indeed dire. She might need a transplant soon. My dad kept calling, saying mom needed emotional support, that she wanted to see me before I moved away. But I had nothing left to give. I visited her in the hospital one last time, brought her flowers, and told her I wished her no harm, but that our relationship was shattered. She cried, begging me not to leave, promising to make up for everything. I just told her long, painful, final goodbye. My heart was heavy, but my choice was made. I moved to a city several hours away and threw myself into my new job. The startup atmosphere was intense but rewarding. I learned quickly and started earning decent money. Eventually, I found a modest place to live, made some new friends, and built a life free from my family's shadow. Whenever guilt tried creeping in, I reminded myself of their deeply hurtful betrayal. I reminded myself of the lonely nights when I was homeless, the tears I shed when I realized my parents trusted a lie over me. That kept me focused on moving forward and never looking back. 2 years passed. I advanced in the company, becoming a project manager. One day, out of the blue, I got a call from my aunt. My mom's health had declined severely, and she was on a waiting list for a heart transplant. My aunt said my parents wanted me to visit, even if just to say goodbye in case things went south. I felt my chest tighten, but I also felt that old anger simmering. Why should I rush to her bedside when she'd never been there for me? Still, a part of me felt I should at least check. I took a couple of days off and drove back. The hospital room felt suffocating. My dad was there, looking haggard. Kayla stood in the corner, silent as a ghost. My mom looked like she was fading away, hooked up to machines. She brightened when she saw me, but I kept my distance. My dad tried to pull me aside, begging for reconciliation, claiming my mom needed peace of mind. I told him I owed them nothing. I'd come only to see for myself if she was still alive. No, I didn't word it kindly. I was done pretending. My mother tried to speak, voice trembling. She said she wanted my forgiveness, that her final wish was to see me reunited with the family. Kayla tried to chime in, but I silenced her with a glare. I told my mom that she'd lost the right to ask that of me. I reminded her of the years I spent struggling, the accusations that nearly ruined my future. I told her I had no intention of rejoining their family circle. My dad started shouting, calling me ungrateful and cruel. I told him he was reaping what he'd sown all these years. Her health deteriorated rapidly after that. My aunt kept me updated. I refused to visit again. Some might call that heartless, but I saw it as the outcome they created. The damage was done long before her illness. She passed away a month later. My dad left me voicemails, calling me every name under the sun, blaming me for her death. I blocked his number. I had tried to be civil. They wanted me to pretend the past never happened. I couldn't. I wouldn't. The funeral came and went, and I didn't attend. They had made their bed long ago. To my shock, after her death, Kayla reached out again. She sent a long email saying she didn't expect me to forgive her, but she wanted to let me know she was miserable and filled with regret. She said our dad had turned cold toward her too, blaming her for my estrangement. She claimed she hadn't realized the full consequences of her lie until now. She ended by asking if we could at least talk. I stared at that message, remembering every single hurt she caused. I deleted the email. Revenge. Sometimes is just letting them suffer completely in silence. Over time, my life flourished. I got promoted again, purchased a small condo, and traveled with friends. I occasionally saw updates about Kayla. She struggled to find stable work, apparently overshadowed by her own reputation for lying and manipulative behavior. My dad fell into debt, possibly from medical bills. None of it bothered me. In fact, it felt like poetic justice. They had each other, but they'd destroyed their own unity long ago. I found love with someone who valued my worth, and we built a supportive relationship. I no longer felt that gnawing emptiness I once so deeply carried. Sometimes I think about how different things might have been if Kayla hadn't lied, if my parents had believed me, if they'd given me a chance. But dwelling on that changes nothing. My life now is the product of my own resilience, and I'm proud of it. I won't deny the bitterness still lingers in some corners of my heart, yet it fuels me, reminds me that I can stand on my own. People often ask if I regret not reconciling before my mom passed. Honestly, no. She made her choice when she fully believed Kayla's lie over her own child. Now, my dad sometimes sends letters, each filled with guilt-tripping and accusations. He claims I'm selfish for ignoring family obligations. But family is more than blood. Family is trust, loyalty, and compassion. They showed me none of that when I was 17, desperate and alone. Kayla, from what I hear, still tries to contact me occasionally, but I've moved on. I have my own circle of loved ones. I won't let their pleas pull me back into a toxic cycle. They had their chances to be a family. They blew it. I chose myself, and I've never, ever regretted it. That's my story. No neat bow at the end. No miracle reconciliation. I survived their betrayal, built my own life, and refused to let them leech off my success or my emotions. My mom is gone, and I never got closure, but honestly, I'm at peace with that. My dad and Kayla can live with the consequences of their lies and cruelty. I don't owe them forgiveness, and I won't pretend otherwise. Sometimes cutting ties is the only way to heal. If they wanted a different outcome, they should have considered the cost before discarding me like trash in cold blood. I never imagined I'd be typing this, but here I am, sharing my life's biggest betrayal on an anonymous forum. My wife and I were married for almost 30 years. We had 2 kids, our son Michael and our daughter Kayla. I truly believed we'd grow old side by side, building memories and watching our grandchildren run around. That belief died when Kayla showed up on my doorstep last year and revealed the truth about what had really happened back when Michael was still in high school. I've spent the past months unraveling the twisted lies that shaped my relationship with my own son, and now I'm determined to get the revenge I deserve. Michael was always closer to my wife, while Kayla tended to bond with me whenever minor family disagreements cropped up. I never saw anything sinister in it. But when Michael turned 16, he changed. He grew distant and resentful toward me, stopped asking for my advice, and avoided our usual outings. I chalked it up to teenage angst. We'd argue and he'd shout that I didn't understand him. His mother intervened and gave me rationalizations. I thought I should let him figure out his own feelings. I spent years trying to repair our bond, but he only drew further away. By graduation, he barely spoke to me. Eventually, he cut me off almost completely, except for obligatory holiday visits. Then, 4 years ago, right after I retired, Michael stopped visiting altogether. The only connection we had was a group text my wife moderated. It tore me up inside, wondering why my own son seemed to despise me. I never suspected the betrayal that was festering behind the scenes, nor the lies woven by the person I had trusted most. Here we truly are at last, finally. I never blamed Kayla for staying in contact with her mother. They always had a good relationship, and I wasn't about to weaponize my divorce plans. Because yes, once Kayla told me everything, I knew there was no salvaging my marriage. It turns out my wife had an affair around the time Michael was 16. She'd started seeing a coworker from the accounting firm where she used to work. Kayla was only 12 then, but she caught her mother lying about late nights at the office. Like any curious kid, she snooped. She found texts on her mother's phone, read some explicit details, and was terrified to tell me. Instead, she confronted her mother. My wife reacted by swearing Kayla to secrecy. Kayla was scared and agreed, but always kept that knowledge locked inside. Meanwhile, Michael discovered something was off, but never got the full story. My wife manipulated him, implying that I was the one who'd stepped out on the marriage, or that my controlling nature drove her to seek emotional support elsewhere. She fed him twisted half-truths, painting herself as the victim and me as the villain. Michael believed her. In his eyes, I was the unfaithful father who broke his mother's heart and forced him to live in tension. That explained his anger toward me. When Kayla grew older, she realized how twisted everything was. She tried confronting her mother again, but my wife refused to come clean. Then Kayla reached out to me, guilt-ridden, for not exposing the affair sooner. She asked if I'd ever cheated on my wife. The question floored me. I had never so much as considered it. That's when Kayla told me everything. In that moment, I felt my world flip upside down, like I'd been asleep for years. I felt betrayed. I confronted my wife that same night. I waited until Kayla left, sat my wife down, and calmly asked if there was anything she wanted to tell me. She gave me that blank stare I'd seen so many times before, the one that often preceded half-hearted excuses. This time, I didn't let her speak. I laid out what Kayla told me. I expected anger or tears, maybe even denial. Instead, she just looked tired, like someone who'd finally been cornered. She admitted to the affair, just once, she claimed. She insisted she ended it quickly, that it was a mistake, and that she kept quiet to avoid tearing our family apart. She blamed me for being distant, for working too much, for never being the husband she needed. None of that mattered to me. The real wound was how she'd manipulated Michael. She tried to spin it, saying Michael had simply drawn his own conclusions, that he'd been upset at me for other reasons. But I knew she was lying. She'd let Michael hate me for her misdeeds. She'd allowed me to be alienated from my son without ever trying to set the record straight. 30 years of marriage shattered by her selfishness. I told her we were done. She scoffed like she expected me to back down. She told me I was overreacting, that Michael's estrangement was partly my fault for not trying harder. She said Kayla was stirring up drama. I just grabbed my coat, walked out, and drove to a hotel. I left her there with her guilt or whatever sliver of conscience she had left. I was livid and felt the painful sting of all the years lost. But I also felt a strange clarity, like a switch flipped in my mind. I wanted revenge, punishing revenge. I contacted an attorney the following day. By then, I was resolved to finalize a divorce. But I also wanted to correct Michael's perception. I couldn't stand the idea that he still believed I'd been unfaithful or abusive. The attorney advised me to gather evidence of the affair, just in case. Kayla handed over screenshots of texts she had saved long ago, plus a few pictures she snapped of her mother's phone. The messages were explicit proof of my wife's betrayal. I also found old receipts from restaurants and hotels that didn't match the dates she'd given me for business trips. It felt like walking back through time, connecting the dots I should have seen years ago. Next, I privately reached out to Michael. I simply said I wanted to meet. He refused. He told me he had no interest in rehashing the past. I almost gave up, but Kayla insisted we not let her mother's lies continue poisoning him. So I wrote Michael a letter. Yes, an actual handwritten letter. I told him that I knew we'd been estranged for years, but that I loved him regardless. I said there was something crucial about our family history he needed to hear. I didn't beg for his sympathy, just asked him to listen. I enclosed copies of a few texts between my wife and her affair partner, with explicit timestamps from that period. Then I mailed it off. 2 weeks passed, no response. I was preparing myself for the possibility that Michael would never contact me again. Meanwhile, my wife kept calling. She left voicemails alternating between threats and apologies. She insisted I shouldn't drag Michael into our marital problems, but she'd done precisely that for years. My anger only grew, fueling my determination to see this through. I wanted justice. Then, out of the blue, Michael showed up unannounced at my doorstep. He looked tense, like he'd been wrestling with his conscience. Without a word, he handed me the pages I'd sent, silently daring me to explain. So I did. I told him everything Kayla had shared, showed him more evidence, and answered every question he fired at me. By the end, I could see the anger in his eyes, the anger that was no longer aimed at me. He realized he'd spent years resenting the wrong parent. I expected him to break down or maybe storm away, but he just stood there, quiet and trembling. Then Michael asked why I never fought back, why I never told him my side of the story sooner. I admitted that I never thought my wife, his mother, would spin such vicious lies. I believed I'd eventually reconcile with my son through honest conversations, never imagining there was a secret this massive behind it all. Michael didn't cry. He just shook his head and said he felt betrayed by the person he'd trusted most. Hearing that broke my heart. Still, I cautioned him that the divorce would get ugly. My wife was already trying to paint me as irrational and vindictive, using Michael's estrangement as proof that I'd been a terrible husband. I told him I didn't need him to pick sides, only that he deserved to know the truth. He nodded and said he needed time to process. Then, almost as an afterthought, he apologized for hating me all these years. I told him it wasn't his fault, that the blame rested squarely on his mother. When he left, I felt a wave of relief, but I also felt that scorching drive for revenge intensify even further. It consumed my thoughts, day and night, relentlessly. My attorney moved forward with the divorce filing. I opted for a no-fault approach initially, hoping to keep things simpler. But I wanted to expose my wife's infidelity if needed, especially if she tried to twist the narrative. Unsurprisingly, she fought back, claiming emotional distress and attempting to secure a larger share of our assets. She even hinted she might call Michael as a witness, expecting him to support her allegations of my supposed cruelty. Her arrogance astounded me. Meanwhile, Kayla had been staying with me off and on. She worked on the other side of town but came by on weekends. She was the one who suggested that I get a private investigator to see if my wife was still cheating. Frankly, I didn't care if she was sleeping with half the city at that point, but Kayla argued that any recent infidelity might further discredit my wife's sob story. So I hired someone to follow her discreetly. Within a week, I received photos of my wife meeting the same coworker at a motel. It was still going on after all these years. I was livid, but not surprised. My attorney advised me to keep this evidence under wraps until the right moment. I agreed. Michael was still distant, but he would occasionally text me short questions about my perspective on certain events from his teenage years. I answered patiently, never pressuring him to see me again. I wanted him to come to terms with the facts at his own pace. Deep down, I suspect he was grappling with guilt. He'd let his mother's lies define our relationship. I understood he needed time. My focus was on building an airtight case for the divorce and preparing for the day I'd confront my wife with every last piece of evidence. The day of reckoning came during a settlement conference. My wife arrived with her lawyer, looking smug and confident. She probably thought Michael's old hostility toward me would keep me from pushing back too hard, but I had no intention of playing nice. We started discussing asset division, and her attorney made outrageous demands: spousal support for an indefinite period, the house, and a hefty chunk of my retirement. She claimed she'd sacrificed her career to care for the family, painting me as an ungrateful husband who'd benefited from her domestic labor. I was prepared for this narrative. My attorney quietly slid the evidence across the table, photos of her current affair and the old screenshots with explicit timestamps. Her lawyer's eyes widened and my wife's face paled. I watched her composure crack. She stammered something about irrelevance, claiming these were old issues. My attorney pointed out that the affair was ongoing and that it directly impacted the question of spousal support. If she was living with or intimately involved with another partner, the court might reconsider her claim. The look on her face was priceless. Then, I dropped the final bombshell. I presented the letter from Michael. He'd written it just a few days before the conference, explaining that he'd recently learned the truth about the affair and clarified that I was never unfaithful. He apologized for not speaking up sooner and stated he wouldn't support any false claims. My wife's lawyer grew visibly uncomfortable. The smugness vanished from her face entirely. All her posturing fell flat, and she looked like a trapped animal. We took a short recess. My wife tried to corner me in the hallway. She hissed that I was destroying our family's reputation. I reminded her that she'd already done that long ago. I refused all mercy. When we resumed, her lawyer tried to negotiate a quick settlement. They proposed a moderate split of assets, some alimony, but nowhere near what they initially demanded. My attorney and I declined. I wanted her to sweat. I wanted to let her know that I would drag every skeleton out of the closet if she pressed her luck. Finally, they caved to more favorable terms. My wife lost her chance at indefinite spousal support. She'd get a smaller monthly payment for a fixed period, and we'd sell the house, splitting the proceeds with a ratio favoring me. It wasn't about the money as much as it was about setting the record straight. By the end of that tense meeting, she looked deflated. The face she once wore, confident, manipulative, self-assured, had vanished. I took no joy in seeing her reduced to that state, but I felt vindicated. For years, she allowed me to be demonized in my son's eyes. She stole precious moments I might have shared with him. If she thought I'd just roll over and accept that, she was dead wrong. Afterward, I sent Michael a text, letting him know how things turned out. He replied that he was sorry it had come to this, but appreciated my honesty. He also said he wanted to meet again. We ended up sitting down for coffee a few days later. He admitted he still felt torn, that part of him loved his mother and struggled to reconcile her actions with the woman he once idolized. I understood. I told him he didn't have to hate her, but he needed to see her for who she was. He nodded. Our relationship was far from perfect, but at least the lies were gone. I finally felt free, in a way I never had before. You'd think that would be the end of the story, but I wasn't quite finished. Maybe I should have been satisfied with the divorce settlement and clearing my name with Michael, but the years of pain and estrangement fueled a lingering fury inside me. I needed a final act of retribution. So, when my wife complained about losing face among our social circle, I decided to make sure everyone knew the truth. I hosted a small get-together, inviting longtime family friends, a few relatives, and some mutual acquaintances. My wife foolishly showed up, probably hoping to do damage control. Instead, she walked into a room of people who had already heard my side. I didn't air dirty laundry in a dramatic speech, nor did I wave around the explicit evidence. I simply told people that any rumors about me being unfaithful were false, and that the actual affair had been entirely hers. I explained that I'd kept silent for Michael's sake, but now I felt compelled to clarify. Kayla corroborated my account. By the end of the evening, my wife looked like she wanted to disappear. She tried to spin the story, saying it was complicated, that I'd neglected her emotionally. Nobody seemed convinced. She left early and I felt no remorse. I wanted her to understand, in no uncertain terms, that this was the consequence of her lies. Some might say I went too far. They might argue that public humiliation is cruel, but I spent years as the scapegoat, losing priceless moments with my son. I owed her no sympathy. She'd sown the seeds of betrayal, and now she had to harvest the results. After that night, I felt something loosen in my chest, like a knot finally untied. My revenge was complete. I never regretted it, ever. In the months that followed, I finalized the divorce paperwork, sold the house, and moved into a smaller place closer to Kayla's job. She visits me regularly, and we share the simple joy of watching old movies or trying new recipes in my modest kitchen. Michael and I stay in touch too. We aren't best friends, but the hostility is gone. We've started to rebuild something resembling a normal father-son relationship. Sometimes he asks if I'll ever forgive his mother. My answer remains the same. I don't see how I could. She purposely destroyed our bond for her own convenience. She expected me to shoulder the blame and suffer quietly. I see no reason to grant her absolution. Last I heard, she's still seeing that coworker. They've become more open about it, possibly because she no longer has to pretend. Her reputation has taken a hit, especially among the people who once believed her sob stories. Some have cut her off entirely. Others maintain contact but keep her at arm's length. I don't particularly care. I did what I had to do to clear my name and protect whatever remained of my relationship with my son. I don't wish her well, nor do I curse her. She exists as a reminder of how fragile trust can be. Do I feel better now that I've had my revenge? In many ways, yes. The anger no longer consumes me. I don't lie awake at night obsessing over what could have been. That satisfaction is enough for me. I'm not naive. I know life doesn't always offer perfect closure, but I've found a sense of peace in making sure the truth prevailed. I lost years with Michael, and I'll never get them back. But at least I didn't let her lies stand unchallenged. From the moment I discovered I was pregnant, I felt a mix of terror and excitement that most expectant mothers feel. I was 25 and had been married for just under 2 years. My husband and I had deliberately waited until we felt ready, and when that positive test finally came, we were genuinely happy. However, I could never have anticipated the mess that would unravel with my own mother. She'd always been protective, but never in my wildest imagination did I think she'd try to steal my baby. This happened last year, and the fallout has been devastating, albeit freeing. I grew up in a household that revolved around my younger sister, Emily. She was a high achiever, a social butterfly, and according to our mother, destined for greatness. Whenever I accomplished something, my mother's first comment would usually revolve around how Emily might do it even better. I eventually got used to it, finished high school, went to college, and met the man who'd become my husband. There were no major arguments or rifts, but my mother's favoritism was always there, simmering beneath the surface. When Emily got engaged, my mother became even more intense about everything. I announced my pregnancy a few weeks after Emily set her wedding date. I was about 3 months along at the time. My family seemed happy overall. My dad gave me a big hug, and Emily squealed with delight. But my mother had a weird expression I couldn't read. She forced a smile, congratulated me, then immediately asked if my due date would interfere with Emily's wedding. I told her it wouldn't because Emily was getting married in the late summer and my baby was due in early spring. In theory, there'd be several months difference, so no direct conflict. Over the next few months, my mother's behavior became erratic. She complained that my pregnancy was overshadowing Emily's engagement, even though nobody else seemed to think so. She refused to accompany me to any prenatal checkups and kept urging me not to mention the baby too much around Emily. My sister, for her part, didn't seem bothered at all. She was thrilled to become an aunt. But my mother kept pushing this idea that all eyes had to be on Emily, and I should know better than to steal the spotlight. It made family gatherings incredibly awkward. Right before I gave birth, Emily's wedding planning was in full swing. My mother was running around picking venues, tasting cakes, and yelling at florists. She refused to talk about my baby at all. At my baby shower, which was organized by my best friend, my mother showed up late, gave me an obviously re-gifted item, and left early. She called me the next day and reminded me not to get too comfy with the attention since the wedding was only a few months away. I chalked it up to her typical obsession with Emily and tried to shrug it off. My son arrived without complications. The day I went into labor, my mother didn't pick up her phone. My father visited us at the hospital, but my mother was conspicuously absent. Emily came by briefly, apologized for our mom, and said she was busy with wedding stuff. I tried not to let it bother me. My son was healthy, and that was all that mattered. I posted a quick birth announcement online, which got a lot of positive feedback from friends and family. That same evening, I received a cold text from my mother. Don't show him off too much. 2 weeks after we brought my son home, I got a call from a local adoption agency. At first, I assumed it was a telemarketer or some spam call, but the woman on the line mentioned specific details, my name, my husband's name, and even my baby's name, asking if we were proceeding with the adoption plan we'd initiated. I was stunned. I told her she had to be mistaken. She insisted she had our information, all properly submitted with forms that had my forged signature on them. She asked if I still wanted to proceed. I immediately hung up and called my husband, who was equally shocked. We agreed that this had to be some sick joke or a mistake, but I was too unsettled to ignore it, so we drove to the agency in person. The staff there looked uncomfortable when we arrived. They handed me photocopies of forms that supposedly bore my signature. It was a sloppy imitation of my handwriting, but enough to fool someone who didn't know me well. My blood ran cold when I saw my mother's name listed as the person assisting with the arrangement. She had done this. I confronted my mother that same evening. I called her repeatedly until she picked up. She acted clueless at first, feigning ignorance about everything. When I mentioned the adoption agency by name, she let out a heavy sigh and told me to stop overreacting. She said I was too young, not financially stable enough, and that having a baby just before Emily's wedding would create unwanted drama. She insisted my baby was better off with another family. The calmness in her voice was chilling, as though she genuinely believed she was doing something noble. I felt sick to my stomach. That night, I was too furious to sleep. My husband and I talked about our options. My first instinct was to cut her off entirely and never look back, but the gravity of what she did went beyond a personal grudge. She forged documents in an attempt to give my baby away. That was criminal. We also suspected she might try something else. If she was capable of forging signatures, who knew what else she might do? So we contacted a lawyer the next day. He was appalled by the story and immediately helped us file the necessary paperwork. I informed my father about what was going on. He was horrified and said he had no idea my mother was doing any of this. He knew she was fixated on Emily's wedding, but he never believed she'd go that far. Emily was also shocked and offered to talk to our mother, but we advised her not to get involved beyond providing moral support. We wanted a clear line of action that wouldn't be muddled by family drama. The lawyer guided us through obtaining an emergency protection order to prevent my mother from making any further attempts at interfering. Within a week, I received an angry phone call from my mother. She screeched at me for dragging the family name through the mud by involving a lawyer. She also demanded I drop everything because Emily's wedding is soon and we don't need this scandal. I told her we were done speaking unless it was through legal channels. She tried to guilt trip me, claiming she was only doing what was best for me and my baby. I hung up. A few days later, I was served with official documents indicating my mother was disputing the protection order. The hearing for the protection order was scheduled. My mother showed up with a lawyer she'd apparently hired at great expense. She argued that she'd never intended to actually go through with the adoption and that it was all a misunderstanding. The judge listened quietly. Our lawyer presented the documents from the adoption agency, the forged signatures, and testimony from the agency staff. My mother's lawyer tried to cast doubt on the authenticity of the signatures, but it was an uphill battle. The judge granted the protection order, citing that there was substantial evidence of my mother's misconduct. After the protection order was in place, I started getting calls from extended family, all repeating the same plea. It's almost Emily's wedding. Can't you just let it go for now? They didn't seem to grasp the seriousness of what my mother had done. Forging documents to put my child up for adoption wasn't a small mishap. Some relatives thought I was overreacting. I stopped taking their calls. My focus was on safeguarding my baby and ensuring my mother faced consequences. When the district attorney contacted me regarding possible criminal charges, I cooperated fully. I wanted justice. Emily's wedding arrived. I didn't attend. My mother was still under a protection order, and I wanted no drama. I sent Emily a heartfelt message, apologizing for missing her big day, but explaining I couldn't risk any confrontation. She understood, though I could sense her disappointment. Meanwhile, my mother played the martyr at the wedding, telling anyone who would listen that I was hell-bent on ruining Emily's special moment. A few cousins texted me saying they heard my mother ranting, but by then, I'd grown numb to the gossip. My priority was my family's safety and peace. After the wedding, my mother apparently thought I'd back down. She was wrong. The criminal investigation proceeded. The district attorney gathered evidence that included statements from the adoption agency, the forged documents, and phone records showing repeated contact between my mother and the agency. I provided every scrap of communication I had, including her text messages. My mother's lawyer tried to argue she was under stress due to wedding preparations and acted irrationally, but that didn't excuse forging legal paperwork to put a baby up for adoption. The prosecution pushed forward, and soon charges were formally filed against her. When my mother was arrested, she posted bail almost immediately. My extended family erupted in chaos. Some said I was tearing the family apart. Others quietly supported me, saying they'd always known my mother had a cruel streak but never expected it to go this far. My father was heartbroken. He still lived with her but claimed they barely spoke. Emily tried to keep the peace, but it was impossible. Our mother was facing serious charges, attempted fraud, forgery, and a slew of related offenses. She tried to contact me again, but my lawyer advised me not to respond. The legal process dragged on for months. During this time, I focused on my son. Watching him grow became my primary source of joy. I found a therapist who helped me process the betrayal I felt. My mother's actions had shattered any illusions I had about her. Therapy gave me space to grieve the mother I wished I'd had and accept the reality of the one I did. There was no going back. Forgiveness wasn't on the table. I wanted her punished, and I felt no remorse about it. That clarity empowered me to keep fighting relentlessly. Eventually, the case went to trial. My mother sat across the courtroom, looking composed in her expensive suit. She'd hired a new lawyer by then, someone with a reputation for being aggressive. I felt a surge of anger every time I looked at her, remembering how she tried to take my baby from me. The prosecution presented the evidence, recorded statements from the adoption agency, the forged forms, and even bank records showing my mother had paid certain fees in advance. My mother's lawyer tried to paint me as an ungrateful daughter who misunderstood her mother's intentions. I testified, recounting every detail of what had happened. The judge and jury heard how I discovered the scheme, the forged signatures, and my mother's threatening messages. The defense tried to rattle me by bringing up family issues, suggesting I was exaggerating out of spite. But the facts spoke for themselves. My mother had no excuse for forging my signature on legal documents. It was a clear violation of the law. The adoption agency representatives confirmed everything, leaving the defense little room to maneuver. By the end of the trial, it was obvious where the truth lay. The jury deliberated for a day before reaching a verdict. My mother was found guilty on multiple counts, including forgery and attempted fraud. She wasn't taken into custody immediately. Sentencing was scheduled for a later date. I felt a rush of vindication, but it was tinged with sadness. This was my mother after all, but she'd crossed a line I couldn't overlook. The rest of my family was torn. Some believed justice had been served, others blamed me for not keeping it in the family. Regardless, I had no regrets. My child's safety and well-being came first. When sentencing day arrived, my mother appeared in court with the same defiant attitude. She read a statement declaring her love for me and her grandchild, insisting that she'd only tried to do what she believed was best. The judge was unmoved. The evidence of her deliberate actions was overwhelming. She was sentenced to serve time in prison, along with fines and mandatory counseling. The moment the gavel came down, I felt a surreal sense of closure. My mother, the person who tried to steal my baby's future, was finally facing the legal consequences of her actions. Justice. My father tried to convince me to visit her in prison. He said she was remorseful, that she wanted to apologize. But I remembered the countless chances she'd had to stop or come clean. She never did. She only doubled down when I resisted her plans. As far as I was concerned, she wasn't welcome in my life or my child's. My father was torn up about it. but he respected my boundaries. Emily reached out occasionally, updating me on how our mother was doing, but I cut those conversations short. I had no interest in her remorse. In the months following her conviction, I focused on rebuilding my life. I went back to work, and my husband and I found a new routine. We attended more therapy sessions, strengthening our relationship and fortifying our resolve to protect our family. My son was thriving, hitting milestones, and bringing light into every day. Occasionally, I'd hear a new rumor about how my mother was blaming me for her downfall, but I refused to let it get to me. She had tried to ruin my life and my baby's future, and she deserved every consequence she received. Legally, the matter was settled, but emotionally, I was still healing. My mother had betrayed me in a way that felt almost unimaginable. She hadn't just hurt me, she attempted to orchestrate a future where my baby would be raised by strangers. The only solace I found was in the knowledge that she was held accountable. I wasn't interested in any reconciliation or closure talk. My mother had shown me exactly who she was, and I believed her. The courts may have decided her fate, but in my eyes, she had sentenced herself to permanent exile from my life. People often describe revenge as a dish best served cold, but in my case, it was a matter of survival. My mother showed me who she was, a woman willing to betray her own daughter to maintain a facade of a perfect family event. I didn't seek her destruction out of petty spite. I sought legal recourse because she threatened my child's future, and I'd do it again if I had to. There's no making amends for trying to place someone's newborn for adoption behind their back. At least now, she can't harm my family any further. That's my story. My mother is convicted, serving her sentence, and I have no intention of ever letting her back into my life. She tried to take my baby away because she couldn't stand the thought of someone else receiving attention during my sister's wedding season. I hope she realizes the depth of her wrongdoing, but even if she doesn't, I'm at peace. My son is safe, my husband and I are stronger than ever, and I've learned that I don't owe anyone forgiveness. Justice was served, and I have no regrets. That's how I took my life back. I couldn't be happier with the outcome.